The gentleman from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just initially, I wanted to make the observation, Mr. Chairman, according to the pre-sentence report, Mr. Beal is looking at between 30 and 37 months in Federal prison for about a $900,000 loss. You get more time in prison for that, than that for stealing a six-pack of beer if you threaten that you have a weapon which you really don't have. You get more time in prison for that for a very small amount of certain controlled substances. Even though he refused to answer our questions, Mr. Sullivan, did you interview Mr. Beal?
My staff did, sir.
Did you advise him of his Fifth Amendment right?
At the time of the interview with him, it was with counsel, it was in the U.S. Attorney's Office or proffer, and that was not necessary. It was per written agreement he would cooperate with us.
All right, so you had an agreement with him that he would cooperate. Did that agreement also include that he would cooperate with other entities that were investigating wrongdoing?
At the time, the agreement was the proffer meeting, and it was up to the U.S. Attorney whether he would accept it or not. So it was a limited agreement.
He's getting a 3-level reduction in his guideline range for cooperation. That's super acceptance of responsibility. And yet this morning he wouldn't answer a single one of Chairman Iss's questions. So I guess my question is anyone going to go before the district court judge and make sure he or she knows that Mr. Beal wouldn't even answer this branch of government's questions? He answered I mean, you can't plead guilty without waiving your Fifth Amendment privilege. So he waived it for the judge, and he waived it for the executive branch when you wanted to talk to him or when the U.S. Attorney wanted to talk to him, but he wouldn't waive it for Darrell Issa when he wanted to talk to him. Well, can I rest assured that the sentencing judge will be made aware of that?
Well, what we will do, Mr. Gowdy, is we will brief the U.S. Attorney, AUSA, on the case, and we'll bring your concerns forward to the U.S. Attorney assigned to the case.
Yeah, I just find it stunning that you would want to avail yourself of the maximum departure from the guidelines that you can get for acceptance of responsibility and still sit here and not answer a single solitary question from a co-equal branch of government. Ms. Maloney asked a question that I thought was an extremely good question. Actually, she asked a bunch of really good questions, but I never heard an answer to this one. Is there a policy or procedure in place to investigate conflicts of interest between those who approve bonuses and those who receive bonuses? Not all at once.
The only requirement I know of, Congressman, is a financial disclosure requirement of all the senior officials.
So in theory, Mr. Brenner could be approving financial bonuses or other financial incentives for someone that he has a financial stake in whether or not they get more money. Is that within the realm of the possible? Because it certainly sounds like that's what went on.
Well, I'm not going to speculate on what's possible, but
why not?
Because I'm going to wait to read what the IG investigative report.
Well, if you're not going to speculate on what's possible, my next question is this. If Mr. Chaffetz or Jimmy Jordan told Chairman Issa that they weren't going to be here for a couple of weeks because they were CIA operatives, how would Mr. Issa go about verifying whether or not, and I'm going to be very clear, to date, neither Mr. Chaffetz nor Mr. Jordan have alleged that they're CIA operatives. But if that were to happen, how would Mr. Issa go about investigating whether or not that was true?
I can't answer that.
Well, the next person who claims it at your agency, how will you go about investigating whether it's true?
Under the current rules, as Mr. Sullivan pointed out, if there's an interagency relationship with that agency, the general counsel and the head of the agency would know.
So, what, a phone call?
I don't know what the process
is. Is that what we're talking about, Mr. Sullivan? A phone call to verify whether or not someone really is a secret agent with the CIA?
Well, I testified earlier, sir, that in 2008, a new directive came out, I think it's Intelligence Directive 304, which requires the Director of National Intelligence to inform the head of an agency and the agency's general counsel if one of their employees is working undercover for the CIA.
Mr. Sullivan, I appreciate that. And it really doesn't matter whether you're a new Earth guy or an old Earth guy, but 2008 just seems a little late to be figuring out that with one phone call you can decide whether or not someone who's claiming to be a spy and traveling first class and racking up $900,000 in unwarranted compensation really does work for another agency. I mean, look, I understand technology has progressed a lot. 2008 just seems a little late for us to figure that out. There was nothing in place prior to that?
Well, sir, clearly the officials at the time, going back to the 90s through the 2000s, could have checked his story. No one did. It took us in the IG about a week, using our contacts at the CIA, to positively confirm he had absolutely no relationship with the CIA. We were able to determine early on he's never had a security clearance. So right now, I mean, and when he was an employee, he was not allowed to see classified material because there was no security clearance on file with the EPA Office of Security.
I thank the gentleman. I just want to hear one more time. Since 2008, the head of each agency is given a list of anyone who is a clandestine agent working under their cover.
That's my understanding, Mr. Chairman, from Intelligence Directive 304. It's on the Internet, and it pretty much explains that the requirement of the Director of National Intelligence and the CIA to inform executive branch agencies.
So Secretary Clinton would know everyone at the State Department, and her deputy would know everyone who was CIA implant. The EPA directors, each of them, or administrators, each would have been given this information. So if the administrator had even one person who was embedded, they would know that. We don't need to know if they have one, but if any agency had an embedded CIA person, they would have, in fact, had a list, and he would not have been on it since 2008.
That's right. That's my understanding, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I share with the gentleman from South Carolina his outrage, but 2008 was a long time ago, too. I seem to remember George W. Bush was president then.
I defer to the Chairman's recollection.
With that, we go to the gentleman from Maryland.
I understand that Mr. Beal's fraud